I'm so glad you could join me. Today, I thought we would cover a book that's a little bit different, and this one is called Too Good to Be True. The colossal book of urban legends by Jan Harold Brunvand, who has multiple books on urban legends. This one is just from the last century in 1999. There are lots and lots of stories in this book, so I thought I would just go through and pick some out for us to take a look at together. It says the letters quoted in this book came from readers of my 5 previous urban legend collections from 1981 to 1993, and of my syndicated newspaper columns from 1987 to 1992, who responded to my invitations published there to contribute stories they had heard. Urban legends, or ULs, are true stories that are too good to be true. These popular fables describe presumably real, though odd events that happen to a friend of a friend, and they are usually told by credible persons narrating them in a believable style because they do believe them. The settings and actions in urban legends are realistic and familiar. Homes, offices, hotels, shopping malls, freeways, etc. And the human characters in urban legends are quite ordinary people. However, the bizarre, comic, or horrifying incidents that occur to these people go one step too far to be believable. Let's see, jumping to conclusions. Here we have A Miracle at Lourdes. An Irish Catholic woman, because of poor health, traveled to France in order to visit the famous shrine to the Blessed Virgin Mary at Lourdes. The spring water there is renowned for its miraculous healing powers. The woman became very tired during the long wait at the grotto for the blessing of the sick to begin, and since there happened to be an empty wheelchair among the crowds of pilgrims, she sat down in it for a rest. As a priest finally approached to give the healing blessing, the woman stood up from the chair to meet him, and immediately when the people saw her rising, everybody started to claim that it was a miracle. Crowds gathered around her and they started to push and shove, wanting to touch her. In all this commotion and with all the pushing and shoving, the woman fell and broke her leg, so the poor woman came home from Lourdes with a broken leg. Well, so much for her feeling better. The brain drain. One scorching day, a woman pulled into a parking spot at a supermarket and noticed that the woman in the next space was slumped rigidly over her steering wheel, holding one hand up to the back of her head. She felt concerned for the other woman, but went on with her shopping. Apparently, not very concerned, huh? When she returned to her car with her groceries, the other woman was still sitting in the same position, hand up to the back of her head and bent over her steering wheel. So the first woman tapped on the window and asked if the other woman needed any help. Was she feeling all right? "Please, call 911, she gasped. "I've been shot, and I can feel my brain store's manager, because this was before cell phones, so you had to go into a store to use the phone. When the paramedics arrived, they carefully pried the woman's fingers from the back of her head, examined the injury, and checked the rest of the car. Then they started laughing. The paramedics explained that a canister of Pillsbury Poppin' Fresh biscuit dough on the top of her grocery bag in the back seat had exploded in the heat. The metal lid on the tube had struck the woman on the back of her head, and the top biscuit had shot out and stuck to her hair. The sales receipt in the woman's grocery showed that she had sat there for 1.5 hours before anyone had stopped to offer help. The manager gave her a new can of biscuit dough. Oh, so nice. So this story was also used in a movie. It was one of the Wimpy Kid series movies, The Long Haul, I think. This story became popular during the long hot summer of 1995 and continued to circulate through the following year. A joke version developed on the internet, beginning "Beware the Doughboy," "My friend Linda went to Arkansas last week to visit her in-laws," etc. The comedian Brett Butler, among other media personalities, delighted in retelling the biscuit bullet story, sometimes as a supposedly true story. The leaky brain motif occurred in several old traditional folk tales, one of which may have mutated into the modern legend. I provide a complete history in "The Truth Never Stands in the Way of a Good Story." The solid cement Cadillac. A cement truck driver cut through his own neighborhood one day while delivering a load of ready mix, and he was surprised to see a new Cadillac convertible standing in his driveway. He parked his truck, sneaked up to the kitchen window, and spied his wife inside talking to a strange man. Suspecting that his wife was cheating on him, the driver backed his truck up to the caddy and dumped the full load of wet concrete into it. The Cadillac sank slowly to the pavement like the mother of all lowriders. That evening, the man came home and found his wife hysterical, with the now solid Cadillac being towed away. Through her tears, she explained how that morning the dealer had delivered the new car that she was going to give her husband for his birthday. She had been scrimping and saving for years to buy him his dream car. This story has circulated in many communities for decades, sometimes claimed to have happened locally as long ago as 1940. In an alternate version, the car was won in a lottery. An authenticated instance of an actual concrete-filled car was reported in the Denver Post in August 1960, but the car was a DeSoto and there was no jealousy motive involved. The tube on the tube. A man working in a small office on an upper floor of a Manhattan skyscraper was exasperated one day when the lone fluorescent tube in his light fixture burned out, rather than bothering the maintenance crew, who always gave him a hard time about fixing anything. He went out and bought a new tube and replaced the burned out one himself. Then he had the problem of disposing of the old tube. It was too long to leave in the wastebasket, and he didn't want it there for the janitor to find, so he decided to carry the tube out of the building at quitting time and leave it in a dumpster. But he still had not found a dumpster by the time he got to his subway station, so the man, holding the fluorescent tube upright, like a shepherd's staff, hoping to disturb as few people as possible, boarded his homeward-bound car. As he rode, several other people caught on, saw no open seats, and grabbed hold of the tube, believing it to be a pole in the subway car. When the man reached a stop, several other hands were still gripping the tube, so he shrugged, released his own grip, and quietly left the car. I guess maybe if you've never seen a fluorescent tube, you might believe that, but they're not that tall. They're not tall enough to be mistaken as a pole. Although this is hardly a popular urban legend, I've heard it just a few times with little variation. It's one of my favorite stories. My invented title fits London's tubes better than the New York subways, but I have no evidence that it was ever told in England. In fact, several people told me they believe they read it in the Life in these United States section of Reader's Digest. That's no guarantee that the story has any truth to it, of course, and its details seem highly unlikely. I agree. I find that highly unlikely. The Surpriser, Surprised, version number 1. Why I Fired My Secretary. 2 men sat at the club and one said, "Say, how is that gorgeous secretary of yours?" "Oh, I had to fire her." "Fire her? How come?" "Well, it all started a week ago last Thursday, on my 49th birthday. I was never so depressed." "What has that got to do with it?" "Well, I came down for my breakfast, and my wife never mentioned my birthday. A few minutes later, the kids came down, and I was sure they would wish me a happy birthday, but not one word. As I say, I was most depressed. But when I arrived at the office, my secretary greeted me with 'Happy birthday,' and I was glad someone remembered. At noontime, she suggested that it was a beautiful day, and that she would like to take me to lunch to a nice intimate place in the country. Well, it was nice, and we enjoyed our lunch and a couple of martinis. On the way back, she said it was much too nice a day to return to the office, and she suggested that we go to her apartment where she would give me another martini. That also appealed to me, and after a drink and a cigarette, she asked to be excused while she went into the bedroom to change into something more comfortable. A few minutes later, the bedroom door opened, and out came my secretary, my office staff, my wife, and 2 kids, with a birthday cake, all singing 'Happy Birthday,' and there I sat, with nothing on but my socks. The story has been around since at least the 1920s. Anne Landers first printed a version sent to her by a reader in a 1976 column, and she liked the story well enough to reprint it twice more, in 1993 and 1996. Another version made the rounds in newspapers in 1982 via reprints of a Los Angeles Times business column reporting stories told at a local conference of realtors. In the March 1997 issue of Reader's Digest, yet another variation appeared, billed as a true story that happened to the former boss of a reader from San Diego. Here's version 3, The Fart in the Dark. Once upon a time there lived a man who had a maddening passion for baked beans. He loved them, but they always had a very embarrassing and somewhat lively effect on him. Then one day he met a girl and fell in love. When it was apparent that they would marry, he thought to himself, "She is such a sweet and gentle girl who will never go for this kind of carrying on." So he made the supreme sacrifice and gave up eating beans. They were married shortly thereafter. Some months later, his car broke down on the way home from work, and since they lived in the country, he called his wife and told her that he would be a little late because he had to walk home. On his way, he passed a small cafe, and the odor of freshly baked beans was overwhelming. Since he still had several miles to walk, he figured that he would walk off the ill effects before he got home. So he stopped at the cafe. Before leaving, he had ate 3 large orders of baked beans. All the way home he putt-putted, and after arriving he felt reasonably safe that he had putt-putted his last. His wife seemed somewhat agitated and excited to see him, and she exclaimed delightedly, "Darling, I have the most wonderful surprise for dinner tonight." She then blindfolded him and led him to his chair at the head of the dining table. He seated himself, and just as she was ready to remove the blindfold, the phone rang. She made him vow not to touch the blindfold until she returned, then went to answer the phone. shifted his weight to one leg and let go. It was not only loud, but ripe as rotten eggs. He took the napkin from his lap and vigorously fanned the air about him. Things had just returned to normal when he felt another urge coming on him, so he shifted his weight to the other leg and let go again. This was a true prize winner. While keeping his ear on the conversation in the hall, he went on like this for 10 minutes until he knew the phone farewells indicated the end of his freedom. He placed his napkin on his lap and folded his hands on top of it, smiling contentedly to himself, and was the very picture of innocence when his wife returned, apologizing for taking so long. She then asked him if he had peeked, and he, of course, assured her that he had not. At this point, she removed the blindfold, and there was his surprise. 12 dinner guests seated around the table for his birthday dinner. That's funny. This version is another anonymous piece of Xerox lore that elaborates on earlier earthy tellings with fairy tale-like language and structure. Let's see. Let's flip farther out and see what we can find. This one is just desserts. Let's read the Fallen Angel Cake. Most everyone in town knows these two ladies, so they will remain anonymous for obvious reasons. This was so reported a small-town Canadian newspaper in 1982. The first lady was to bake a cake for the church ladies group bake sale, but she forgot to do it until the last minute. She baked an angel food cake, and when she took it out of the oven, the center had dropped flat. Oh dear, there was no time to bake another cake, so she looked around the house for something to build up the center of the cake. She found it in the bathroom, a roll of toilet paper. She plunked it in and covered it with icing. The finished product looked beautiful, so she rushed it to the church. She then gave her daughter some money and instructions to be at the sale the minute it opened and to buy that cake and bring it home. When the daughter arrived at the sale, the attractive cake had already been sold. The lady was beside herself. A couple of days later, the same lady was invited to a friend's home, where 2 tables of bridge were to be played that afternoon. After the game, a fancy lunch was served, and to top it off, the cake in question was presented for dessert. After the lady saw the cake, she started to get off her chair to rush into the kitchen to tell her hostess all about it. But before she could get to her feet, one of the other ladies said, "What a beautiful cake." The first lady sat back in her chair when she heard the hostess say, "Thank you, I baked it myself." The same story was published around 1980 in the Sydney, Australia Morning Herald. Oh, no worries. She said she baked it herself. Let's read this one. Fifi spills the paint, aka Kitty takes the rap. I recently heard about a friend of a friend, a FOAF, who is an interior decorator with a thriving business in Chicago's wealthy North Shore. He had just finished painting an elegant home in Wilmette and was going around with a can of touch-up paint, making sure everything was perfect. He finished the last brush stroke, stepped back to admire his work, and kicked the paint can over onto the priceless oriental rug. What to do? At that moment, the client's yappy, snappy, obnoxious toy poodle Fifi trotted into the room. Thinking quickly, the decorator scooped her up and dropped her into the puddle of paint, at the same time exclaiming loudly, "Fifi, bad dog, what have you done?" Oh my goodness. Poor Fifi. And here's a drawing of the painter and poor Fifi and the spilled paint and the devastated owner. I was attending a seminar in trial advocacy sponsored by the Association of Trial Lawyers of America, held on November 11th through 16th, 1989, in Washington, D.C. One of the featured speakers was a famous Texas trial lawyer, Jack Simmerman. Mr. Simmerman has a wonderful Texas twang, and he gave his speech with a great deal of colorful language. He was speaking on the rules of evidence and their use in trials. He was critical of the tendency of prosecutors to rely on circumstantial evidence. Then he told a story, which he said was from his boyhood. He said that he and his brother, aged about 8 and 10, had been left in charge of the house while their mother went out to run an errand. She had left a Dutch apple pie cooling on the kitchen table. The boys were specifically told to keep an eye on the pie and to make sure that no one touched it or ate any of it. But the pie smelled wonderful, and eventually the aroma became irresistible. Jack reasoned that if he and his brother only took a little bit from the corners of the pie and then smoothed it over, their mother would never know the difference. Unfortunately, the boys were unable to stick to their plan, and they ended up eating almost half of the pie. They knew that they could never hide or disguise what they had done, and just then Jack heard his mother's car pull into the garage. Suddenly, Jack got an idea. He grabbed the family cat and he shoved its face into the pie. The cat's face became covered with bits and pieces of the pie filling and the crumb crust. Jack's mother walked into the kitchen and saw the cat looking up at her, and she didn't hesitate for a moment. She grabbed the cat and threw him out the back door into a stream right behind the house, which everyone called the river. At this point, Mr. Simmerman ended his story saying, "Now that wasn't the last cat to be sent up the river on crummy circumstantial evidence." Wah wah. Fifi was sent to me in 1986 by Susan Levin Krakowski of Crystal Lake, Illinois. After I published her story in a newspaper column and in curses broiled again, several professional painters wrote to inform me that this is a traditional ploy, well known among painters, as a way to shift blame for spillages. The variation, "Kitty Takes the Rap," was sent by Jim Goodluck of Cleveland, Ohio. I paraphrased it in The Baby Train and also mentioned a letter that Jack B. Simmerman of Houston sent me in 1990 in response to my query. Simmerman wrote, "For criminal defense attorneys, this story is the perfect explanation of how seductive, yet how weak circumstantial evidence can be." But, he continued, "I confess I learned the story from another trial lawyer, one of Colorado's greatest courtroom attorneys, Len Chesler of Denver. Another version of the story, involving 2 young girls and some spilled berry cobbler, appears in Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eye, published in 1972. Let's read this one. Sticking up for one's rights. A sweet grandmotherly widow was convinced by her son to start carrying a small handgun in her purse for self-protection in these perilous times. The first week she had the gun, she came out of a shopping mall to the parking lot and found 2 men sitting in her car drinking beer and eating. With a firm, determined air, she pulled the gun, advanced on the car, aimed it directly at the men, and ordered them out. The men jumped out of the car and ran away in great panic. But when the woman got into the car, she found that her ignition key did not fit. Then she noticed her own car, identical to theirs, parked 1 row over in the lot. How many times have you walked out to the parking lot thinking that you were going towards your own car and it wasn't it when you got there? It's pretty funny. Oh my goodness. The elephant that sat on the VW. We popped the elephant myth. It was a good story. A reliable guy called the Philadelphia Bulletin and said a girl he works with knows a woman who took her kids to the Philadelphia Zoo. When she came out, there was a big dent in her Volkswagen, and a zoo employee was waiting in the parking lot. He said an elephant being unloaded from a truck sat on the Volkswagen, and the zoo would pay the damages. Here's our angry-looking elephant who has destroyed a car. On her way home, the woman was mistakenly stopped for leaving the scene of an accident. She told the policeman she hadn't been in the accident she had just passed. The dent in her car was caused by an elephant sitting on it. She was given a sobriety test at a police station. Finally, the police called the zoo and confirmed her story. The reliable guy said he would get the name and address of the woman and call right back. He never did. That was no surprise. A call to the zoo immediately established that no Volkswagen has ever been abused by one of its elephants, and that zoo officials have heard this one before. Within 2 weeks, another reliable person from another part of the area called another bulletin reporter and told him the same story. How these stories begin to circulate is a mystery, but anybody who has his Volkswagen dented by an elephant might as well keep quiet about it. No newspaper man will believe him. Or apparently the police either. From an article by James Smart in Small World, The Volkswagen Owners in the United States, Fall 1970, page 7. The editor's note follows. Small World's elephant file contains 27 accounts of the sat-upon VW story, dating from as early as 1962. One night, this guy came into the ER with both hands cupped over his face. He wouldn't take his hands down until the paramedics promised not to laugh at him. Uh-oh. When he finally took one of his hands down, they saw that one of his fingers on one hand was stuck inside his nose. He told them that he had been picking his nose while waiting in his car at a red light. Then somebody had rear-ended his car, which threw his head forward and into his steering wheel. His nose had swollen so fast that he couldn't get his finger out of it, and so he had come to the emergency room for help. Okay, that's pretty funny. The Unzipped plumber or mechanic. Newspaper friend Tom Ungles of Santanta, Kansas, an occasional visitor to Woodland Park, has forwarded a copy of a lighter vein item appearing in a Kansas newspaper. The item gave us a few chuckles, so we pass it along to the courier readers for hopefully the same purpose. We give you this, believe it or not, from the Arkansas Daily Traveler. This story, purported to be true by those who tell it, has its locale in Lawrence, Kansas. It seems a young wife noticed that the trailer home occupied by her husband and herself had developed a plumbing problem. She informed her husband of this fact and left the mobile home for an errand. Returning, she found a pair of legs extending from beneath the trailer and, feeling playful, giggled, lowered the zipper on the pants, and entered the door of the house. Imagine her chagrin when she found her husband lolling on the couch watching television. When she had recovered her composure enough to explain to her mate what she had done, he in turn explained to her that he called a plumber when he found the repair job beyond his abilities. Gathering their courage, they ventured outside together to attempt to explain to the plumber below the home. They found the plumber in the same position as before, except that he appeared to be unconscious from a blow to the head he evidently suffered when he reacted to the playful prank of the young housewife by quickly raising his head to see what was happening. Horrified, the young couple called an ambulance, and soon the vehicle with 2 attendants arrived on the scene to aid the injured plumber. When the circumstances surrounding the injury to the man were subsequently related to the 2 attendants, however, they became so overpowered with the humor of the situation that during a fit of convulsive laughter, they dumped the hapless plumber to the ground, breaking his arm. Imagine, if you can, that plumber awakening in the hospital with a broken arm and a knot on his head, with the last positive memory being that feeling of his zipper being lowered. This is from Australia's Rockhampton Morning Bulletin. A Central West couple couple drove their car into Rockhampton Kmart only to have their car break down in the car park. The husband told his wife to carry on with the shopping while he fixed the car. The wife returned later to see a small group of people near the car. On closer inspection, she saw a pair of male legs protruding from under the chassis. Oh no, we know where this is going. Although the man was in shorts, his lack of underpants turned private parts into glaringly public ones. Unable to stand the embarrassment, she dutifully stepped forward and tucked everything back into place. On regaining her feet, she looked across the bonnet and found herself staring at her husband standing idly by. The repairman had to have 3 stitches inserted in his head. The first item is from the Nude Bachelor Courier of Woodland Park, Colorado, April 15th, 1971. Sent to me by Charles Pheasant of Littleton, Colorado. The second is from the editorial report column of the National Lampoon, which would be like The Onion nowadays. August 1988, True Facts issue. Though somewhat stilted in style, these items illustrate how newspapers borrow legendary material from one another and thus contribute to the spread of folk narratives. This story has had more versions than the victim had stitches on his clobbered head, but perhaps the most standard variation has the husband simply working on his car that's parked in his own driveway. Unbeknownst to his wife, he enlists a neighbor or a professional mechanic to help him. Let's try the Nude Bachelor. In a 1987 release, Jim Davis, creator of the popular Garfield comic strip, retold a classic urban legend in 7 graphic panels and a few well-chosen words. By such means, urban legends sometimes gain an assist from the mass media and again pass by word of mouth with renewed vigor. In the first panel of Davis's Sunday strip for March 15th, the feisty feline Garfield gives his owner John a sharp smack for using up all the hot water during his shower. The next 5 panels depict the cat's revenge. He waits until John has stepped out the front door, wrapped only in a towel, to pick up the morning paper, and then he gives the door a quick slam, stranding John outside. In the last panel, 2 neighbors comment on the disgusting scene of the bachelor caught outside in the nude. The Nude Bachelor has been told for years as one of the most popular caught with your pants down urban legends. It usually is said to have happened to a friend of a friend, but the very widespread telling of this story is a virtual guarantee that it didn't really happen to anyone, even remotely connected with the storytellers. Oh, I'm pretty sure I've seen that in multiple movies, where somebody gets locked out. Oh, I know I've heard this one before. The Blind Date, May 1st, 1994. Dear Ann Landers, I met a young woman at college who has it all. Looks, brains, and personality. I finally got up enough nerve to ask her out, and she accepted. After we had been dating for a few months, it became apparent that she was beginning to feel as strongly about me as I felt about her. So we made plans to go on our first out-of-town overnight trip together, a drive to San Diego for a 3-day weekend. Although I didn't know for sure that anything was going to happen, I thought I'd better be prepared, so I stopped by a drugstore on the way home from school to buy some condoms. I had never bought condoms before. I usually got them from friends, so I was a little ill at ease. I tried to make small talk with the pharmacist as he rang up my purchase, and foolishly blurted out that I might get lucky over the weekend. When I went to pick up my girlfriend the next morning, imagine my shock when the pharmacist answered the door. He was her father. I was so embarrassed I couldn't speak. Fortunately, my girlfriend was ready on time and we managed to leave after a brief introduction. We had a lovely weekend, but I didn't tell her that I had bought the condoms from her father. I now am feeling quite guilty and uneasy. Should I say something and get it over with, or keep quiet? Van Nuys, California. California. Nice. So here's Ann Lander's response. Dear VN, keep quiet. It's enough that you are embarrassed. Why make your girlfriend uncomfortable too? There are times when the less said, the better, and this happens to be one of those times. May 1st, 1994. Dear Ann Landers, the story in today's column about the guy buying condoms from a pharmacist who turns out to be his date's father is an old urban legend. Many readers have written me about this story, several of them pointing out that it also appeared in a 1972 underground comic book as one of the adventures of the fabulous furry freak brothers. I think the reader from Van Nuys, California, who sent it to you either read it in my book, saw the comic book, or simply heard the story in oral tradition. Best wishes from a faithful reader, Jan Harold Brunvand. I will say for Jan, he seems to be the ultimate promoter of his own work. May 16th, 1994. Dear Jan H. Brunvand, sorry to be so late in responding to your letter of May 1st, but I just returned from a cruise and am catching up with the mail that accumulated in my absence. I'm really embarrassed by the fact that I've been had. Dozens of readers have written to me to tell me the condom letter was a gag. I'm amazed that no one in my Chicago office or my California syndicate caught it. I'm signing myself. Red-faced in Chicago, Ann Landers. This story made more sense when told decades ago, before condoms were openly displayed in grocery stores, drugstores, convenience stores, and the like. More recent versions describe a young woman either being fitted for a diaphragm or buying a pregnancy test kit from a doctor or a pharmacist, who turns out to be her boyfriend's mother or father. Along a similar line, Joe and Teresa Gardner, in their syndicated People's Pharmacy column for January 29th, 1995, tell the story of a young man who returned to the drugstore where he had purchased his high-tech metal whammo slingshot to buy a new rubber sling. When he told a young girl at the pharmacy counter that he needed a rubber for his whammo, she turned bright red and suddenly turned to some urgent business in the back of the store, leaving him standing there. Buying Tampax. I've heard this one so many times that I've stopped counting. I've heard it from actual grocery store clerks both in Arizona and Florida who swear they've heard it live. A beautiful woman went shopping in a grocery store. Of course, she's got to be beautiful to make this work. After reaching the checkout counter, the clerk, also female, asked her, "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" "Well, yes, there is," the shopper replied. "I looked for a box of Tampax on the shelves, but I couldn't find it." "No problem," the clerk said, grabbing the store microphone. "Stock boy," her voice boomed over the loudspeaker. "We need a box of Tampax at register 3. The woman grew embarrassed, waiting as all the other shoppers were looking at her smiling. In the back room, 2 stock boys were working, listening to the announcement. "What do they want?" the first stock boy inquired. "Thumbtacks," the stock boy who just entered said. The first stock boy grabbed his own microphone and boomed his message over the loudspeaker. "Do you want the kind you push in with your finger or the kind you pound in with a hammer?" I'll read that again. "Do you want the kind you push in with your finger or the kind you pound in with a hammer?" The shopper fled the store without waiting for an explanation. Oh, man. That's really, really funny. Sent to me in 1987 by Kevin Fellman of Phoenix. I earlier got the same story from readers in Texas and Connecticut, and a student of mine told me that she had heard it told during a training session for grocery store cashiers. In some version, the stock boy inquires over the loudspeaker, "What happened to that price check you wanted on a box of thumbtacks?" In 1996, David Altum of St. Louis, Missouri, reported to me that his fiancée and a friend actually heard the Tampax thumbtacks dialogue broadcast over a loudspeaker at a local Target store. I I suspect that this was a deliberate prank carried out by someone who had heard the old story. Oh man, that is too funny. I think we can wrap it up there for today. I'm so glad you could join me, and I hope you enjoyed this tale of urban legends. Let me know in the comments if there's any good urban legends that you're familiar with. As always, I hope you're taking care of yourself and sleep well.